The dawn light spilled like honey over the Whispering Pines ranch as Cooper Westfield stepped onto his weathered porch, steaming coffee cradled in calloused hands. The distant mountains cut a jagged line against the amber sky, and the morning dew sparkled across fields that had been in his family for 4 generations. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at this hour, but there she was, limping up his gravel drive, a wicker basket clutched against her chest like it held the world's most precious cargo. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her chestnut hair caught the sunrise, framing a face etched with determination, despite the clear pain in every step. The basket swayed precariously, with each limping stride. Cooper set his mug down slowly, his brow furrowing as he squinted against the morning light. Folks didn't just wander up to Whispering Pines. It was too remote, too far from anywhere that mattered. Yet here she was, a stranger with a limp and a basket of what appeared to be eggs, making her way toward his home like she had an appointment. "Mornin'," Cooper called, his voice carrying across the yard. She startled, nearly losing her footing on the uneven ground. The basket tilted, and Cooper found himself holding his breath. Her hands steadied it just in time, and the relief on her face was palpable even from a distance. "I'm looking for work," she called back, her voice stronger than her fragile appearance suggested. "I can cook, clean, mend. I don't need much." She took another step, wincing visibly as her right foot touched the ground. Cooper descended the porch steps, crossing the distance between them with measured strides. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes. Green eyes, he noticed, like spring leaves after rain. Her clothes were worn but clean, her posture proud despite her obvious discomfort. "You walked here?" he asked, eyeing her injured leg. "Part way," she replied, shifting the basket. "Caught a ride with a farmer for some miles." "Why here?" She hesitated, glancing at the sprawling ranch house, the distant barn, the acres of land that surrounded them. "I heard you might need help. Since your grandmother passed." Cooper stiffened. His grandmother's death 6 months ago had left a void in the ranch operations. She'd run the household with military precision while he managed the land and livestock. News traveled fast in small towns, but still, something about this woman's appearance felt too convenient, too calculated. "Who told you that?" "Woman at the diner in Riverbrook. Said you're too stubborn to hire help even though you need it." That sounded like Mabel, the diner owner who'd been friends with his grandmother for 50 years. Still, Cooper's natural caution hadn't survived 38 years on the frontier by taking strangers at their word. "What's in the basket?" he asked, nodding toward her burden. She lowered it slightly, revealing a cloth-covered collection of eggs. "Payment for letting me stay. Just until I get steady work." The eggs were various sizes, some brown, some white, arranged carefully in neat rows. They looked fresh, valuable, especially out here where store visits were weekly affairs at best. "You walked miles with a bad leg carrying eggs?" The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable. "I made a promise," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "To bring them safely." Cooper studied her face, searching for deceit, but finding only exhaustion and something else. A quiet desperation hidden beneath layers of dignity. He knew that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror after Rachel left, taking his dreams of family with her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eleanor. Eleanor Hayes." She shifted her weight, clearly favoring her right leg. "Everyone calls me Ellie." Cooper nodded toward the basket. "Those eggs won't survive long in this heat." "I've been careful," she replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. "Not one has cracked." Something about her determination struck a chord in Cooper. Maybe it was the stubborn set of her jaw, or the way she stood tall despite her injury. Or perhaps it was simply that the ranch had been too quiet since Gran's passing. Whatever the reason, he found himself saying words he hadn't planned. "Well then," he said, reaching for the basket. "Stay, if none break." Ellie's eyes widened, her fingers tightening momentarily on the handle before she released it to his care. What? Eggs are fragile things, Cooper said, lifting the cloth slightly to examine them. Like promises. If you've managed to keep these whole during your journey, maybe you're someone who follows through. He lowered the cloth. The old bunkhouse needs cleaning. It's small, but it's private. You can stay there while we see if this arrangement works. Relief washed over her face before caution replaced it. And if an egg is broken? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cooper considered this, weighing the basket in his hands. Then we'll know something about luck, won't we? Come on, let's get you off that leg. The eggs were intact. Every single one. Cooper counted them twice as he transferred them carefully to a bowl in the kitchen. 12 perfect eggs. A dozen unbroken promises. Ellie sat at his grandmother's old oak table, her injured legs stretched out before her, watching him with wary eyes as he moved around the kitchen she'd never seen before today. How'd you hurt yourself? Cooper asked, setting a glass of water before her. Jumped from a moving truck, she answered without elaboration, taking a small sip. Cooper raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Everyone had secrets out here on the frontier. The mountains had a way of collecting people running from something or towards something, sometimes both at once. You always travel with eggs? He asked instead. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Only when making important journeys. Cooper leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest. He'd inherited his father's height and his mother's thoughtful nature, a combination that often made people mistake his silence for judgment. In truth, he was simply observing, cataloging the details of this unexpected visitor. Ranch work is hard, he said finally. Even harder with a bad leg. It'll heal, she replied, determination flashing in her eyes. I'm stronger than I look. Most people are, Cooper agreed. Bunkhouse is out back. It's not much, but it's clean. Well, clean-ish. Been empty a while. I can clean, Ellie said, straightening in her chair. I told you, I can earn my keep. Cooper nodded, then reached for a wooden cane propped in the corner. His grandmother's, unused since her passing. Use this. Property's uneven. Easy to lose your balance. Ellie eyed the cane with reluctance before accepting it. Thank you. It's practical, not kindness, Cooper replied. Can't have you injuring yourself further. Doctor's 2 hours away. The bunkhouse was a small cabin set back from the main house, originally built for ranch hands when Cooper's grandfather had run larger herds. These days, Cooper managed with seasonal help and his own 2 hands. The cabin had gathered dust but remained structurally sound. A single room with a bed, small table, wood stove, and bathroom added sometime in the 90s. Ellie stood in the doorway, leaning on the cane, taking in her new temporary home. It's perfect, she said softly. Cooper wasn't sure perfect was the word he'd choose for the neglected space, but he appreciated her lack of complaint. Sheets in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Should be clean. Gran was particular about storing things properly. Your grandmother, Ellie said hesitantly. She ran this place with you. Since my grandfather died, 15 years back. She handled the house, the accounts. I handled everything else. Cooper felt the familiar hollow ache that accompanied any mention of his grandmother. She was a force of nature. I'm sorry, Ellie offered simply. Cooper nodded once, acknowledging her words without inviting further conversation on the topic. Rest that leg today. Tomorrow we'll see what work suits you. He turned to leave, but paused when Ellie spoke again. Mr. Westfield? The eggs, what will you do with them? Cooper considered the question. Breakfast, I expect. Unless you had other plans for them. She shook her head. No, that's good. They should be used. Cooper left her to settle in, walking back to the main house with measured steps. He wasn't entirely sure what had possessed him to offer shelter to a stranger with a mysterious limp and a basket of eggs, but something about Eleanor Hayes intrigued him. Perhaps it was the determination in her eyes, or the careful way she'd transported those eggs across what must have been considerable distance. Or maybe it was simply that the ranch had felt too empty lately, the silence, too heavy in rooms once filled with his grandmother's humming. Whatever the reason, Cooper found himself glancing back at the bunkhouse, watching as smoke began to curl from its chimney. Eleanor Hayes was making herself at home, and Cooper wasn't entirely sure how he felt about that. The next morning, Cooper rose with the sun as always, moving through his routine with practiced efficiency. He was halfway through his first cup of coffee when a knock at the kitchen door surprised him. Eleanor stood there, Gran's cane in one hand, a small bundle in the other. "Morning," she said, her voice clearer than yesterday rested. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Cooper stepped aside, allowing her entry. "You're up early." "Farm hours," she replied, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. She moved carefully but with purpose. Her limp, still pronounced, but her movements more confident than the day before. She set the bundle on the counter and unwrapped it, revealing several wild herbs tied with twine. "Found these growing near the bunkhouse," she explained. "Thought they might be nice with those eggs." Cooper raised an eyebrow. "You know herbs?" "My grandmother taught me," Eleanor said, a softness entering her voice. She could heal most anything with what grew wild. Cooper gestured toward the stove. "Help yourself. Pans in the cabinet below." Eleanor moved with surprising grace despite her injury, finding what she needed without excessive questions or hesitation. Cooper watched as she worked, cracking eggs with one hand, a skill that spoke of long practice, and adding the herbs with careful precision. The kitchen filled with a fragrant aroma that reminded Cooper of mornings long past, when his mother had still been alive to cook breakfast for the family. "You said you jumped from a moving truck," Cooper said after a while, refilling his coffee. "Want to tell me why?" Eleanor's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Not particularly." Cooper nodded, respecting her reticence. "Fair enough, but if someone comes looking for you, I should know." She turned then, her green eyes meeting his with unexpected intensity. "No one will come looking, not here." There was something in her voice, a certainty tinged with what might have been fear, that made Cooper believe her. He didn't press further, instead watching as she plated the eggs and set them on the table. "Eat," she said simply, "before they get cold." The eggs were perfect, better than anything Cooper had managed in the months since his grandmother's passing. The herbs added a complexity that transformed the simple dish into something remarkable. "You can cook," he acknowledged between bites. A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I told you I could." After breakfast, Cooper showed Eleanor around the property. The barn with its half-dozen horses, the chicken coop that had fallen into neglect, the vegetable garden overrun with weeds. She took it all in with careful consideration, occasionally making observations that revealed a deep knowledge of farm operations. "Your chicken coop needs reinforcing before you bring in new hens," she noted, pointing to a section where the wire had begun to sag. "Foxes will get in there within a week otherwise." Cooper followed her gaze. "Been meaning to fix that. Haven't had time." "I can do it," Eleanor offered. "Once my leg's a bit stronger." "Chicken coop seems a fitting project for someone who arrived with eggs," Cooper remarked dryly. Eleanor's laugh caught him off guard. A genuine sound that transformed her face, erasing years of whatever hardship had etched itself there. Perhaps it's destiny then. As they continued their tour, Cooper found himself sharing more than he'd intended. Stories about the ranch's history, his grandfather's dreams for the place, his grandmother's fierce stewardship after his passing. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed a sharp mind behind her quiet demeanor. "And you?" she asked as they rested on a fallen log overlooking the eastern pasture. "What are your dreams for this place?" Cooper considered the question longer than most would have. "To keep it whole," he said finally. "To pass it on better than I found it." "To whom?" The question was gentle but direct. Cooper's jaw tightened. "Whoever comes next." "Doesn't have to be blood to be family." Eleanor nodded, understanding something unspoken in his words. "The land chooses its own sometimes." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Cooper found himself stealing glances at his mysterious guest. The way the sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the careful way she massaged her injured ankle when she thought he wasn't looking, the quiet dignity she carried like a cloak around her shoulders. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "What are you running toward, Eleanor Hayes?" She stiffened slightly before relaxing with a sigh. "Safety," she admitted. "A place where promises matter, where what's broken can heal." Cooper nodded, understanding more than she might have intended to reveal. "Well, your eggs made it intact. That's a start." In the days that followed, Eleanor established herself as invaluable around the ranch. Despite her injury, she managed to clean the bunkhouse until it shone, reorganize the chaotic kitchen pantry, and begin revitalizing the neglected vegetable garden. Cooper found himself watching her work with growing appreciation, not just for her contributions to the ranch, but for the quiet determination with which she approached every task. A week into her stay, Cooper returned from mending fences in the north pasture to find Eleanor seated on the porch, a pile of his grandmother's mending beside her. Her fingers moved deftly, needle flashing in the afternoon light as she repaired a tear in his favorite work shirt. "You don't have to do that," he said, climbing the steps wearily. "I know," she replied without looking up, "but it needs doing, and I'm good at fixing things." Cooper sank into the chair beside her, stretching his long legs before him. "Leg any better?" "Some." She tied off a thread and bit it with her teeth. "I can put weight on it now without wincing." "Progress." "Might be time to tell me the real reason you're here," Cooper said, watching her carefully. Riverbrook's a small town. No one at the diner mentioned a woman asking about ranch work. Eleanor's hands stilled. She set the mending aside carefully, before meeting his gaze. "You checked up on me. Wouldn't be much of a rancher if I didn't verify what wanders onto my land," Cooper replied evenly. A silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken truths. Finally, Eleanor sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I needed somewhere safe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere far from cities and databases and men in suits." "The eggs were payment for a ride from a farmer who told me about this place. Said the owner was fair, but kept to himself. Said you might need help since your grandmother died." She looked up, her eyes clear and direct. "I didn't lie about that part." "And the rest?" Cooper prompted. Eleanor twisted her hands in her lap. "I worked for a company. Discovered things I shouldn't have. Financial irregularities. Records being altered. When I brought it to my supervisor's attention, things changed. My access was restricted. My apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken." She swallowed hard. "Then my brakes failed on the highway." Cooper felt a cold anger settle in his chest. "Not an accident. The mechanic said the line had been cut," Eleanor confirmed. "That's when I knew I had to disappear. I took what cash I had, left my phone, my credit cards, everything that could be traced. Started heading west, changing directions whenever I felt uneasy." "And your leg?" A wry smile touched her lips. That part was true. "The farmer who gave me a ride got nervous when we passed a state trooper. Thought I might be trouble. I jumped rather than risk him turning me in." Cooper absorbed this information, piecing together the puzzle of Eleanor Hayes. "These people? They're still looking?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe. Probably. What I found could send people to prison. Powerful people." Cooper nodded slowly, considering. "Well," he said finally, "chicken coop still needs fixing. Garden's half-weeded. Plenty of work for someone who needs to stay off the grid for a while." Relief washed over Eleanor's face, followed quickly by wariness. "Just like that? You believe me?" "People don't fake the kind of fear I saw in your eyes when you first arrived," Cooper said simply. "Besides, you carried those eggs for miles without breaking a single one. Shows character." Eleanor's laugh held a note of disbelief. "Is that really why you let me stay? Because of eggs?" Cooper stood, stretching his back. "Eggs. Promises. Same thing, really. Both require careful handling." He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "And yes, I believe you. My grandmother used to say she could spot a liar at 50 paces." Think I inherited that knack. As he moved toward the door, Eleanor called after him. "Cooper? Thank you." He paused, looking back at the woman who had arrived on his doorstep with nothing but a basket of eggs and a desperate hope. "Don't thank me yet, Eleanor Hayes. Winter's coming, and Whispering Pines gets mighty isolated when the snow falls. You might regret your choice of hiding place." Eleanor shook her head, certainty in every line of her body. "I won't." Cooper didn't know it then, but those two words, spoken with quiet conviction by a woman who had risked everything for truth, would come to mean more to him than any promise he had ever received, more than any unbroken egg in a carefully carried basket. October arrived at Whispering Pines with a painter's palette of amber and crimson, transforming the landscape into a canvas of fall splendor. The morning frost clung to the grass like diamond dust, melting away under the gentle touch of the autumn sun. Cooper stood on the porch, coffee mug warming his hands, watching as Eleanor made her way from the bunkhouse with noticeably less pain in her step. A month had passed since she'd arrived with her basket of eggs and secrets, and in that time, she'd carved out a place for herself in the rhythm of ranch life. "Morning," she called, her breath visible in the crisp air. Frost came early. Cooper nodded, offering her a mug as she climbed the steps. "First real cold snap. Happens this time every year." Eleanor accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. "Garden needs covering. Those late tomatoes won't survive another night like this. Already planned to handle it after I check the north fence. Storm last week might have knocked some posts loose." "I'll help," Eleanor offered, sipping her coffee. "My leg's much better now." Cooper studied her, noting the healthy color that had returned to her cheeks, the way she stood straighter, the quiet confidence that had replaced the wary exhaustion of her arrival. "You don't have to prove yourself anymore, Eleanor. You've more than earned your keep." A small smile touched her lips. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I just prefer to be useful." They worked together that morning, moving with the easy coordination of people who had learned each other's rhythms. Cooper had never considered himself a man who played well with others. He'd managed the ranch largely alone since his grandmother's death, hiring seasonal help only when absolutely necessary. Yet with Eleanor, the work seemed to flow naturally, each anticipating the other's needs without excessive words. As they covered the vulnerable plants in the garden, Cooper found himself watching her hands. Strong, capable hands that moved with gentle precision, whether tending seedlings or mending fences. She had healed his grandmother's ancient quilt last week, her stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, preserving a family heirloom he'd feared was beyond repair. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Eleanor asked, catching his gaze. Cooper gestured toward the quilt she'd hung to air on the clothesline. "That. Haven't seen it look that good since I was a boy." Eleanor followed his gaze, a touch of pride softening her features. "Your grandmother had already mended it many times. I just followed her lead." "You're good at following trails others leave," Cooper observed. "Like those financial records at your company." Eleanor stiffened slightly before relaxing with a sigh. "I've always seen patterns others miss. It's a blessing and a curse." "More of a blessing around here," Cooper said, securing a blanket over the last row of tomatoes. "Ranch this size, easy to miss things that need attention. Is that why you never remarried?" The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it, and she immediately looked away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." Cooper straightened, brushing soil from his hands. Rachel left because she wanted city lights and crowds. "I needed open space and quiet." He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both acceptance and lingering hurt. "Some differences can't be bridged." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. Some bridges aren't worth building. They worked in companionable silence after that, finishing the garden preparations before moving to the barn to check on a mare that had been showing signs of colic. Eleanor had a way with the animals that impressed even Cooper, who had grown up surrounded by livestock. She spoke to them in low, soothing tones, her touch gentle but confident. "You've worked with horses before," Cooper observed as she checked the mare's vital signs with practiced ease. "My uncle raised quarter horses in Kentucky," Eleanor replied, running her hands along the mare's flank. "Spent every summer there until college. Kentucky's a long way from here." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Everything's a long way from here." That's rather the point, isn't it? The mare nickered softly, butting her head against Eleanor's shoulder. She's feeling better, Eleanor announced. The peppermint oil in her feed helped, I think. Cooper nodded, making a mental note. His grandmother had used similar remedies, knowledge he had never fully absorbed, despite her efforts to teach him. Having Eleanor reclaim some of that wisdom felt like recovering pieces of a legacy he'd feared was lost. That evening, as the temperature dropped further, they sat before the fireplace in the main house, the crackle of burning pine filling the comfortable silence between them. Eleanor had cooked a hearty stew that simmered with flavors Cooper had almost forgotten, sage and thyme and something else he couldn't quite identify, but that reminded him of holidays long past. "This is how my mother used to make it," he said, setting his empty bowl aside. "Where did you learn the recipe?" Eleanor looked up from her mending, surprise in her eyes. "I didn't use a recipe. Just worked with what was available." She hesitated, but I'm glad it brings back good memories. Cooper studied her in the firelight. The copper highlights in her hair, the gentle curve of her profile, the steady movement of her hands as she returned to her stitching. He was not a man given to flights of fancy, yet he found himself wondering what paths might have brought them together in a world where she wasn't running and he wasn't hiding from his own loneliness. "Tell me something true," he said suddenly. "Something about Eleanor Hayes that has nothing to do with financial records or men in suits." She looked up, startled by the request. For a moment, he thought she might deflect or retreat behind the careful boundaries they had established. Instead, she set her mending aside and met his gaze directly. "I was engaged once," she said softly, "to a man who collected bird eggs, emptied them, and displayed the shells. Beautiful, delicate things arranged in perfect rows." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "I thought it was a passion, something to admire, until I realized he took the same approach to everything, hollowing out what was alive to possess its shell." Cooper waited, sensing there was more to the story. "One spring, I found a nest near our apartment. Robin's eggs, perfect blue. He wanted to add them to his collection." Eleanor's voice grew stronger. "That's when I knew I couldn't marry him. Someone who would destroy something full of potential just to possess its empty shell wasn't someone I could build a life with." "That's why the eggs were important," Cooper realized. "The ones you brought here?" Eleanor nodded. "My grandmother believed eggs carried promise, new beginnings, potential. When I left everything behind, carrying those eggs felt like carrying hope." She smiled wryly. "Silly, perhaps." "Not silly," Cooper disagreed. "Brave. Most people run with whatever's easy to grab. You chose something fragile, something that required care." He added another log to the fire, watching the sparks rise. "Says something about what you value." As October deepened toward November, the ranch prepared for winter's approach. Cooper and Eleanor worked side by side, checking roof shingles, insulating pipes, stocking the cellar with preserved vegetables from the garden Eleanor had revitalized. Her presence had transformed not just the physical spaces of Whispering Pines, but something less tangible, the very atmosphere of the place. Rooms that had gathered dust since his grandmother's passing now held warmth and purpose again. The kitchen, once a utilitarian space where Cooper prepared the simplest of meals, had become the heart of the house once more, filled with aromas that drew him in from the fields earlier than he might have returned otherwise. On a particularly cold morning, Cooper entered the kitchen to find Eleanor surrounded by flour and rolling pins, a determined expression on her face as she crafted what appeared to be pie crusts. "There's a storm coming," she explained before he could ask. "Thought we should have something special to see us through it." Cooper leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "How do you know a storm's coming?" "Forecast said clear skies." Eleanor gestured toward the window, where a certain quality of light painted the landscape. "The air feels different, heavier, and the chickens were restless at dawn." She smiled at his skeptical expression. "My grandmother could predict weather better than any meteorologist. Said it was in her bones." And it's in yours too? Cooper asked, unable to keep a note of amusement from his voice. Some things pass down, Eleanor replied with simple certainty. You'll see. By afternoon, the first heavy clouds had gathered on the horizon, and by evening, snow was falling in thick, silent curtains. Cooper stood at the window, watching the transformation of his land into a white wilderness, aware of Eleanor moving about the kitchen behind him. You called it, he acknowledged without turning. Your bones were right. Told you, she replied, the smile evident in her voice. Hope you don't mind being snowed in with me. Might be a few days before the roads clear. Cooper turned then, taking in the scene she had created. Pie cooling on the windowsill, stew simmering on the stove, candles ready in case the power failed. I've weathered worse company through worse storms, he said, his tone lighter than usual. Eleanor laughed, the sound still rare enough to catch his attention fully. High praise from Cooper Westfield. I'll take it. The storm settled in overnight, burying whispering pines under a heavy blanket of snow. Cooper woke before dawn, as was his habit, and made his way through the silent house to check the furnace. The power remained on, but he stacked wood by the fireplace as a precaution before heading to the kitchen to start coffee. He paused in the doorway, surprised to find Eleanor already there, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing one of his grandmother's old cardigans over her own clothes. Hope you don't mind, she said, noticing his gaze on the sweater. It was hanging by the door, and the kitchen was cold. She would have liked seeing it used, Cooper replied truthfully. His grandmother had never believed in saving things for special occasions, preferring to see them enjoyed in everyday life. Eleanor turned back to the stove, where she was stirring something that smelled of cinnamon and apples. I found her recipe box yesterday. Hope it's okay that I looked through it. It's okay, Cooper said, moving to pour himself coffee from the pot she'd already prepared. They're just gathering dust otherwise. They're more than that. Eleanor disagreed gently. They're her voice, her hands, the way she showed love. Cooper stilled, cup halfway to his lips. In the months since his grandmother's passing, he had carefully packed away her clothes, her personal items, unable to bear their presence yet unwilling to discard them. But her recipes? The cards worn soft with use, corners stained with butter and vanilla. Those he had simply left in their box in the pantry, unable to face what they represented. She made these apple pancakes every Christmas morning, Eleanor continued, unaware of the tide of memory her words had unleashed. The recipe says Cooper's favorite at the top. Since I was 5, Cooper confirmed, his voice rougher than usual. Used to beg for them year-round, but she said some traditions needed to stay special. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, catching something in his expression. I could make something else if you'd prefer. No, Cooper said quickly. No, it's fitting. First real snow of the season. Might not be Christmas, but it's a kind of holiday. They ate by the window, watching the snow continue its silent descent, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and unmarked. Cooper found himself sharing stories from childhood winters, sledding down the East Hill, building forts with his grandfather, the year a pipe burst and they had to melt snow for washing. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, offering her own memories of Kentucky winters, less severe but magical in their own way. Cooper realized it was the most either of them had spoken about their pasts, the storm creating a space outside of normal time, where such sharing felt natural rather than forced. What will you do when spring comes? Cooper asked suddenly, the question arising from nowhere yet somehow hanging between them for weeks. Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. Are you asking if I'll leave? Asking what you want, Cooper clarified. Running isn't the same as choosing. Eleanor considered this, her gaze returning to the snow-covered vista beyond the window. I haven't thought that far ahead, she admitted. When you're running, tomorrow is luxury enough. Cooper nodded, understanding. Ranch needs tending year-round, he said after a moment. Work doesn't stop with the seasons. If you want it to stay on, make it official. Proper employment. Hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes before caution banked it. The people I discovered, They have resources, connections. Staying in one place might eventually lead them here. Whispering Pines is a long way from anywhere, Cooper replied, and I'm not without resources myself. Family's been here 100 years. Built relationships. People around here don't talk to strangers asking questions. The offer hung between them, neither fully expressed nor directly answered. Yet something shifted in that moment. A tentative bridge extending across the chasm of their separate circumstances, offering the possibility of a more permanent connection. The storm lasted 3 days, confining them to the house and immediate barn area, creating an unexpected intimacy as they moved through the shared spaces. Cooper discovered Eleanor humming as she worked, old ballads and folk songs that his grandmother had often sung. Eleanor found Cooper was a voracious reader, with a library that filled an entire room of the ranch house, books on everything from animal husbandry to classical philosophy. On the third evening, as they sat before the fire with mugs of spiced cider, Eleanor asked the question Cooper had been expecting since her arrival. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Cooper considered the question, giving it the thoughtful attention he afforded most things. "Used to think being alone and being lonely were different states," he said finally. "Now I'm not so sure." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Before I came here, I was surrounded by people in the city, neighbors on all sides, co-workers everywhere, and I was desperately lonely. And now?" Cooper asked, meeting her gaze directly. "Now I'm alone with you on a mountain in the middle of a snowstorm," she replied with a small smile. "And I feel more connected than I have in years." Something warm unfurled in Cooper's chest. Something he had thought long dormant, if not dead entirely. "Funny how that works." "Maybe not so funny," Eleanor said softly. "Maybe it's about being seen. Really seen, not just noticed." Cooper understood exactly what she meant. In the weeks since her arrival, Eleanor had observed him with the same careful attention she gave to everything. The animals, the garden, his grandmother's recipes. She noticed when he was tired before he acknowledged it himself, learned which coffee mug he preferred without being told, recognized the signs of an approaching headache in the set of his shoulders. She saw him, not as the stoic rancher the town knew or the disappointing husband Rachel had eventually left, but simply as himself, with all his rough edges and quiet depths. "I see you too, Eleanor Hayes," he said, the words emerging before he could consider their weight. "The real you, not just who you're running from." Tears glistened in her eyes, catching the firelight. "And who is that? The real me?" Cooper set his mug aside, choosing his words with care. "Someone who carries eggs instead of weapons when fleeing danger, who fixes things others would discard, who remembers recipes because they matter to people who matter to you." He held her gaze steadily. "Someone worth knowing, worth keeping safe." Eleanor looked away, overwhelmed by his assessment. "You make me sound better than I am." "Or maybe you've forgotten who you are beneath all that fear," Cooper suggested gently. "Happens to the best of us sometimes." When the storm finally cleared, leaving the world crystalline and transformed, they emerged from the house like explorers in a new land. Cooper headed immediately to check on the livestock, while Eleanor made her way carefully through the deep snow to the chicken coop she had revitalized. They worked separately that morning, each processing the subtle shift in their relationship that had occurred during their snowbound days together. Cooper found himself watching the house from the barn, aware of Eleanor's movements within it. The shadow passing by windows, smoke rising from the chimney, evidence of her presence now woven into the fabric of his daily life. By midday they had cleared enough snow to reach the main road, though it would likely be another day before it was plowed. Cooper was splitting firewood when he heard the distant sound of an engine laboring through the snow-packed road. He paused, axe mid-swing, listening intently. Visitors were rare enough in good weather. In these conditions, they were almost unheard of. The black SUV that eventually emerged from the tree line sent a chill through Cooper that had nothing to do with the winter air. He set the axe down carefully, watching as the vehicle made its slow approach. Without conscious thought, he moved toward the house, an instinctive need to warn Eleanor driving his steps. She met him at the door, alerted by the same engine noise. "Someone's coming," she said, her face pale with sudden fear. "Get your things," Cooper instructed calmly. "The old hunting cabin beyond the north ridge. You remember where?" Eleanor nodded. already moving. What about you? I'll handle whoever this is, Cooper replied, his voice steady despite the tension coursing through him. Go now, through the back. Stay in the trees. As Eleanor disappeared up the stairs to gather her few possessions, Cooper returned to the woodpile, positioning himself casually as the SUV pulled into the yard. He lifted the axe, resuming his work with deliberate unconcern as the vehicle stopped and two men emerged. They were exactly as Eleanor had described them, city suits and polished shoes entirely unsuited to the mountain environment, expressions of practiced neutrality that didn't quite mask the predatory assessment in their eyes. Cooper split another log, the crack of wood breaking the silence before addressing them. You boys look lost, he called, embedding the axe in the chopping block with a solid thunk. Road to the resort is another 20 miles north. The taller of the two men approached, a smile that never reached his eyes fixed firmly in place. Actually, we're exactly where we meant to be. Westfield Ranch, correct? Cooper crossed his arms, studying them with the same careful attention he would give to unknown animals that had wandered onto his land. That's right. Question remains, why are you here? We're looking for someone, the man replied smoothly, removing a photograph from his breast pocket. A former employee of our company. We have reason to believe she may have passed through this area. He extended the photo, a professional headshot of Eleanor, her hair styled differently, wearing makeup and a blazer, but unmistakably her. Cooper barely glanced at it before shaking his head. Haven't seen her, he said flatly. Don't get many visitors up here, especially not city folk like her. The second man had been scanning the property, his gaze lingering on the chicken coop, where fresh tracks in the snow revealed recent activity. You live alone, Mr. Westfield? What's it to you? Cooper countered, deliberately allowing an edge of frontier suspicion to enter his tone. Just being thorough. The man replied with a thin smile. Our colleague has taken some sensitive company information. It's a serious matter. Cooper snorted. Well, I haven't seen her. And now you're trespassing on private property. He reached for the axe, pulling it free from the block with casual strength. I suggest you continue your search elsewhere. The men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The taller one nodded slightly, returning the photo to his pocket. Of course. Sorry to have troubled you. He extended a business card. If you do happen to see her, we'd appreciate a call. Cooper made no move to take the card. After an awkward moment, the man placed it on the edge of the woodpile and retreated to the vehicle. Cooper remained where he stood, axe in hand, watching as they turned the SUV around and made their way back down the snow-covered drive. Only when they had disappeared from sight did he move, quickly gathering the card and heading toward the north ridge where Eleanor waited, her future once again balanced as precariously as a basket of unbroken eggs. The hunting cabin stood like a sentinel among ancient pines, its weathered logs and stone chimney bearing witness to 3 generations of Westfields seeking solitude in these remote woods. Cooper had maintained it faithfully despite rarely using it himself, something his grandfather had instilled in him. Always have a refuge, a place apart from the world where a man could think clearly when life muddied the waters. Now, as he approached through knee-deep snow, following the nearly invisible trail only a local would recognize, he was profoundly grateful for that wisdom. Smoke curled from the chimney in a thin, cautious stream, barely visible against the gray winter sky. Eleanor was there, waiting, wondering if her fragile new life had been shattered once again. He knocked twice, then once more, an old family signal, before pushing the heavy door open. Eleanor stood by the stone fireplace, her face pale but composed, a rifle Cooper kept mounted above the mantel now gripped in her hands. She lowered it immediately upon seeing him, relief washing over her features. It's clear, he said without preamble. They've gone. For now, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. They'll be back. Cooper nodded, moving to stoke the small fire she'd built. Probably. But they were fishing, not hunting. They suspect, but don't know for certain you're here. Did they show you my picture? Yes. Corporate headshot. Hair different. Didn't look much like the woman who fixes chicken coops and makes apple pancakes. He met her gaze directly. I told them I hadn't seen you. Eleanor set the rifle aside carefully, sinking onto the rough-hewn bench near the fire. I'm sorry, Cooper. I've brought trouble to your door. Trouble finds its own way, he replied with a shrug. Question is, what do we do now? Eleanor looked up sharply at the we, a flicker of something like hope crossing her face before caution reasserted itself. I should go. Find somewhere new. Somewhere they won't connect to me. Cooper remained standing, his tall frame casting long shadows in the cabin's dim interior. Running worked when you had nothing to lose. Different now. Because of the ranch? Eleanor asked. I've only been there a few months. The work… Not the work, Cooper interrupted, his voice gentler than his words. Us. What's growing between us? Worth defending, I'd say. A flush colored Eleanor's cheeks, but she didn't look away. I won't put you in danger. These men, what they're protecting. It's bigger than just fraud. There are powerful people involved, government contracts. So we fight smarter, Cooper said simply. I didn't survive 30 years ranching in these mountains by backing down from challenges. This isn't a broken fence or a sick calf, Eleanor protested. No, Cooper agreed. It's more important. He crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her so they were eye to eye. Eleanor Hayes brought eggs to my door instead of emptiness. Brought life back to places I'd let go dark. I'm not giving that up without a fight. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. I'm scared, Cooper. Good, he replied. Fear keeps you sharp, but it doesn't have to keep you running. In that moment, with snow falling softly outside the cabin windows and the fire casting golden light across their faces, Cooper Westfield did something he hadn't planned. Something his logical, measured nature would normally have prevented. He leaned forward and kissed Eleanor Hayes, a gesture as gentle as it was definitive. When he pulled back, the question in his eyes was answered by her hands coming up to frame his face, drawing him back to her. They held each other in the quiet of the cabin, two solitary souls who had found unexpected harbor in each other's presence. Stay, Cooper whispered against her hair. Not because you're afraid to leave, but because you want to build something here. With me. Eleanor pulled back slightly, searching his face. How can we possibly… One day at a time, Cooper replied. Like anything worth doing. They remained at the cabin until nightfall, planning carefully. Cooper had connections in town. The sheriff was his second cousin. The county clerk had dated his sister in high school. Small communities had their own protective mechanisms, informal networks, that could provide warning if strangers came asking questions again. We need to know what exactly they're afraid you'll reveal, Cooper said as they sat at the rough table, a map of the county spread before them. That's our leverage. Eleanor nodded, her analytical mind engaging with the problem. I have notes, encrypted files I sent to a secure email before I left. But accessing them would create a digital trail. Unless we use the library in Riverbrook, Cooper suggested. Old computers, public access. Sheriff Jim could keep watch, let us know if anyone suspicious comes in. They crafted a strategy, not just for immediate safety, but for resolving the larger threat. Eleanor's evidence needed to reach the proper authorities, but through channels her former employers couldn't intercept or control. Cooper knew a journalist in Denver who had once done an expose on water rights that had angered powerful interests, someone who understood both discretion and determination. As the fire burned low, casting the cabin in deepening shadows, Cooper stood and gathered his coat. We should head back to the ranch. Taking the ridge trail. No tracks that way. Eleanor hesitated. Is it safe? Safer than splitting up, Cooper replied. And they'll be watching the roads now, not the house. They think they've established… I'm alone there. The journey back to Whispering Pines was arduous in the darkness and deep snow, but Cooper moved with the confidence of someone who knew every contour of this land. Eleanor followed close behind, her limp barely noticeable now except after the steepest climbs. They traveled in silence, aware that sound carried strangely in the winter woods. When they finally emerged from the tree line, the ranch house stood dark and silent in the distance. Cooper paused. scanning the surroundings with practiced eyes before signaling Eleanor forward. They approached from the back, entering through the kitchen door that Cooper kept oiled and silent. Inside, the house felt different, violated somehow by the earlier intrusion of the men in suits. Cooper moved through the rooms methodically, checking windows and doors, ensuring they were secure. Eleanor watched him, understanding this was as much ritual as practicality, a reclaiming of space. "They left a bug," Cooper said finally, holding up a tiny device he'd found beneath the kitchen table. "Amateur work. Didn't even hide it properly." Eleanor's face paled. "They'll be listening." A slow smile spread across Cooper's face, not one of amusement, but of grim satisfaction. "Let them listen to this." He placed the device on the counter and reached for a radio, turning it to a static-filled country station and setting it nearby. They'll get an earful of Hank Williams, and not much else. That night, they slept in shifts, one watching while the other rested. Cooper took the first vigil, his grandfather's old shotgun across his knees as he sat by the window overlooking the approach to the ranch. Eleanor curled on the couch nearby, exhaustion finally claiming her despite her determination to stay alert. Cooper watched her sleep, the firelight playing across her features, softening the worry lines that had deepened since the arrival of the SUV. In repose, she looked younger, unburdened. A glimpse perhaps of who she had been before corporate secrets and men in suits had forced her to abandon her former life. He found himself making silent promises as the night deepened, not just to protect her, but to help her reclaim the freedom to live without looking over her shoulder. Cooper Westfield was not a man who made commitments lightly, but watching Eleanor Hayes sleep in the fitful glow of the fire, he knew he would move mountains to keep her safe. Morning arrived with fresh snow and leaden skies promising more. Cooper woke Eleanor gently, having let her sleep past her watch. She started awake, momentary confusion giving way to remembered fear as the events of the previous day came flooding back. "No sign of visitors," Cooper assured her, offering a mug of coffee. "But we should move quickly. Storm's coming. Good cover for heading into town." They prepared with careful efficiency, Eleanor gathering the notebooks where she'd documented her recollections of the financial irregularities, Cooper loading supplies into his most reliable truck. They would take the old logging road, longer, but less likely to be watched. As Eleanor pulled on her coat, she paused by the window, looking out at the ranch that had become her sanctuary. "What if we can't come back?" she asked softly. Cooper joined her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. "We'll come back. This land has sheltered Westfields through worse than corporate thugs. It's not letting go of us that easily." The drive to Riverbrook took nearly 2 hours on the back roads, the truck laboring through unplowed sections where the snow had drifted deep. They spoke little, each lost in thought, the gravity of their mission settling between them like another passenger. The town appeared suddenly around a bend. A small collection of buildings nestled in the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, holiday decorations already adorning the main street despite it being only late November. Cooper parked behind the sheriff's office rather than on the street, and within minutes, Sheriff Jim Tanner was ushering them through a back entrance. "Got your message," the sheriff said, leading them to his private office. "Sounds like you've stirred up a hornet's nest, Cooper." "Not me," Cooper replied, nodding toward Eleanor. "Miss Hayes here, former financial analyst who discovered some people with their hands in very deep pockets." Sheriff Tanner studied Eleanor with shrewd eyes that missed little. He was a big man with a weathered face and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life serving a community that respected him. "These men who came looking, they armed?" "Didn't show weapons," Cooper answered. "But that doesn't mean much." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "County's small. Strangers get noticed. Had reports of a black SUV at the gas station yesterday, 2 men in suits buying coffee and asking directions." He turned to Eleanor. "You got proof of what they're trying to hide?" Eleanor nodded, patting her bag. "Notes, dates, account numbers. And I can access digital copies if I can use a computer that can't be traced back to me." "Library's got public terminals," Sheriff Tanner said. "I'll have Deputy Ramirez keep an eye out while you work. Meanwhile," he turned to Cooper, "your journalist friend, she's still in Denver?" "Called her from the cabin," Cooper confirmed. "She's interested. Very interested." What followed was a carefully orchestrated operation that belied the sleepy appearance of Riverbrook. Sheriff Tanner stationed deputies at key points around town, ostensibly for holiday traffic control but actually creating a perimeter that would alert them to any suspicious arrivals. Cooper accompanied Eleanor to the library, where the elderly librarian, who had taught Cooper in 4th grade, provided them with a private study room and a surprisingly adept understanding of internet privacy. "VPN's already installed," she whispered with a wink. "Some of us old folks keep up with the times." Eleanor worked methodically, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed the secure email account where she'd sent her evidence months ago. Cooper stood guard by the door, watching through the narrow window as patrons came and went in the main library. "Got it," Eleanor said finally, a note of triumph in her voice. "Everything's here. Transaction records, altered contracts, offshore accounts. The smoking gun is the connection between the defense contracts and the shell companies in the Caymans." Cooper moved to look over her shoulder at the screen, filled with financial data that meant little to him, but clearly told a damning story to Eleanor. "Can you send it to the journalist?" Eleanor nodded, already composing an email with attachments, and copies to the SEC and the Inspector General's office. Multiple threads they can't easily cut. As she worked, Cooper's phone vibrated with a text from Sheriff Tanner. "Black SUV just past county line marker, 20 minutes out. Wrap it up." Cooper showed Eleanor the message without comment. She nodded, finishing her task with increased urgency but no less precision. When she finally hit send on the last email, she sat back with a deep exhale, as if a weight she'd carried for months had finally been set down. "It's done," she said simply. "Whatever happens now, the truth is out there. They can't bury it again." Cooper squeezed her shoulder gently. "Let's get you somewhere safe until the dust settles." They slipped out the library's rear exit, cutting through alleyways until they reached Sheriff Tanner's office. The sheriff was waiting, his expression grim. "SUV's in town," he reported. "2 men, same description as yesterday. They're at the diner now, showing your picture around." He turned to Eleanor. "Your journalist friend called the station looking for you. Says the information you sent is dynamite, enough to trigger a federal investigation." Relief washed over Eleanor's face. "So it wasn't for nothing. All the running, the fear." "Far from nothing," Sheriff Tanner assured her. "But those men are still a problem. They don't know yet that you've released the information. They're still trying to contain the situation." "Which makes them dangerous," Cooper concluded. The sheriff nodded grimly. "I could arrest them on some pretext, hold them for a day or two, but that's just delaying the inevitable. They'll be back, or others will come." "Unless they have no reason to come," Eleanor said slowly, an idea forming. "If they believed the information was already in the hands of authorities, that continuing to pursue me would only make their situation worse." Cooper caught her meaning immediately. "A confrontation. On our terms." "Controlled conditions," Sheriff Tanner agreed, warming to the plan. "My office. Recorded. We let them know the game is up. That continuing to harass Ms. Hayes will only add witness intimidation to the charges." The plan came together quickly. A deliberate sighting of Eleanor at the general store. Word spread through the town's efficient gossip network, and then a withdrawal to the sheriff's office to wait. Cooper insisted on remaining with Eleanor despite the sheriff's suggestion that he stay out of sight. "I'm already involved," Cooper said flatly. "Have been since she walked up my drive with that basket of eggs." The sheriff raised an eyebrow at this but didn't argue further. He positioned Deputy Ramirez in the front office and another deputy in the adjoining room, both armed and alert. Then they waited, the minutes stretching like hours in the tense silence. When the men finally arrived, their confident swagger faltered slightly at the sight of Eleanor sitting calmly beside the sheriff's desk, Cooper standing like a sentinel behind her chair. Sheriff Tanner invited them in with deceptive hospitality, closing the door firmly behind them. "Gentlemen," the sheriff began, "I understand you're looking for Miss Hayes here. Seems you've found her. Question is, what exactly is your business with a citizen in my jurisdiction?" The taller man recovered quickly, his corporate smile sliding back into place. "This is a private matter, Sheriff. Ms. Hayes has taken proprietary information from our company. We're simply here to recover it and ensure it doesn't fall into unauthorized hands." "Interesting," Sheriff Tanner replied, leaning back in his chair. Because Ms. Hayes has provided me with some concerning information about potential financial crimes involving your company. Serious enough that federal authorities are now involved. The second man stepped forward, his voice harder than his colleagues. She's lying. Whatever she's told you has been documented, verified, and is currently being reviewed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady and clear. As well as an investigative journalist with a national platform. She met the man's gaze directly. It's over. The offshore accounts, the inflated contracts, all of it. Running after me won't change that. The men exchanged glances, a silent calculation passing between them. The taller one spoke again, his tone conciliatory now. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Our company values Ms. Hayes's contributions. If there were irregularities, she observed, we want to address them internally. We could offer a very generous settlement package. Are you attempting to bribe a witness in an ongoing federal investigation? Sheriff Tanner asked mildly. In front of law enforcement officers? Because that's what it sounds like, and I'm recording this conversation. He gestured to the small device on his desk that had been running since they entered. The change in the men's demeanor was immediate, confidence giving way to barely concealed panic. Cooper watched with grim satisfaction as they realized their position had become untenable. We'll be in touch through proper legal channels, the taller man said stiffly, already backing toward the door. No, you won't. Cooper spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable warning. Ms. Hayes is under the protection of this community now. Any further attempts to contact or intimidate her will be met with the full response of local law enforcement. He stepped forward, his height and frontier strength suddenly very apparent. And me. Understood? The men departed hastily, their sleek SUV peeling out of the sheriff's parking lot with unseemly haste for corporate representatives. Sheriff Tanner watched them go through the window, a satisfied smile touching his lips. They'll report back, he observed. Their bosses won't be happy, but they're businessmen at heart. Cost-benefit analysis just shifted dramatically against pursuing you further. Eleanor remained seated, the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation beginning to ebb. Will it really be over that easily? Not easily, Cooper corrected, moving to stand beside her. Nothing about what you've done was easy. You risked everything to expose the truth. Carried it like those eggs, careful not to break what mattered. Sheriff Tanner cleared his throat. The journalist says the story will break within 48 hours. Federal investigators are already seizing records. Your former employers will have far bigger problems than finding you. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes that promised to cover the town in a fresh blanket of white. Cooper helped Eleanor into her coat, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary on her shoulders. Ready to go home? He asked quietly. Eleanor looked up at him, really seeing him. The steadfast rancher who had offered shelter to a stranger with a limp and a basket of eggs, who had stood beside her when others would have turned away, who had seen value in both her strength and her vulnerability. Home, she repeated, testing the word. Whispering Pines. If you want it to be, Cooper replied, a question in his eyes that had nothing to do with corporate threats or financial scandals. Eleanor smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and erased months of worry from her face. I do. Very much. As they drove back, through the gathering storm, the world beyond the windshield transformed into a swirling white canvas. Cooper reached across the seat to take Eleanor's hand. She interlaced her fingers with his, the simple gesture conveying what words had not yet fully expressed. Never thought eggs could change a life, Cooper said after a while, a rare note of humor in his voice. Eleanor laughed softly. Not the eggs, the promise they represented, the care it took to keep them whole. Like us, Cooper suggested, glancing briefly away from the snow-covered road to meet her eyes. Like us, Eleanor agreed, squeezing his hand gently. They returned to Whispering Pines as the day faded, the ranch house a welcoming silhouette against the darkening sky. As Cooper helped Eleanor through the deep snow toward the porch, she paused, looking back at the path they had traveled. Not just the physical trail from the truck, but the longer journey that had brought her to this place, this moment, this man. "What is it?" Cooper asked, noticing her hesitation. Eleanor turned to him, snowflakes catching in her hair like stars. "I just realized I'm not looking over my shoulder anymore. For the first time in months, I'm only looking forward." Cooper's expression softened as he brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "That's what home should be. A place to look forward from." As they stood together in the falling snow, the ranch house waiting with its promise of warmth and security, Eleanor Hayes finally understood what Cooper Westfield had offered her that first day. Not just shelter from a storm, but the chance to stop running and start building something that would last far longer than fear. "Stay," he had said that first morning. "If none break." Not one egg had broken on her journey to Whispering Pines. And now, neither had her spirit, her courage, or her capacity to trust again. Some promises, it seemed, were meant to be kept whole, no matter how fragile they might seem. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.